Okay, let's dive into something really valuable. You've been tackling those California real estate practice tests, right? Specifically practice test 3, and you've pinpointed some concepts that were maybe a bit elusive or, just need that extra layer of understanding. So that's exactly what we're here for. Think of this as like your personalized audio study session designed to really solidify those challenging areas and hopefully give you those crucial aha moments. We've basically pulled out the key insights from your study materials, focusing right on the questions and concepts that often prove, well, the toughest for learners.
Yeah, and what's often the difference maker, I find, isn't just memorizing definitions. It's grasping the nuances, the why behind them. So we're going to break down those areas that demand precision, connect them to the bigger picture of California real estate law and practice. Our mission today: clarify, reinforce, and just to make sure you walk away with a deeper, more confident understanding of these critical topics.
Okay, good. So let's start with that big picture then. Who sets the rules? What are the expectations for real estate professionals in California? Your practice test, it had a few questions that really probed your knowledge of the California Department of Real Estate, the DRE, and its oversight. So the DRE has two main goals. They're kind of intertwined. First, safeguard the public's interest. Simple as that. In all real estate transactions, doesn't matter if it's residential or commercial. And second, efficiently handle all the practical stuff: licensing, subdivisions, consumer support, all that.
Right. And to do that, the DRE isn't just like an advisory board. They have teeth, real power. Their powers range from, refusing a license application altogether to restricting one, maybe temporary suspension, or even permanent revocation. And when we talk about them imposing fines up to $2,500 per violation, what does that tell us about how seriously they take professional conduct?
It tells us they absolutely mean business. Yeah, it's not just a slap on the wrist. It's a clear message. Integrity, following the rules, it's paramount. And speaking of rules, an area that often challenges learners, and it definitely came up for you, is knowing exactly who needs a real estate license and who doesn't. For example, things like seeking borrowers or lenders for loans secured by LUNAs, or negotiating those loans, or even collecting payments on them. Those activities unequivocally require a license, no question. But here's where it gets tricky, right? The exemptions. A lot of people miss these. You saw that scenario, someone selling their own property 10th time in a year. That actually does need a license if it's 8 or more sales contracts annually. It sort of crosses a line into what the DRE considers continuous commercial activity.
Exactly. The nature of the activity is the key. It's not just what you're doing, but how often and why. So while someone acting as an attorney or under a power of attorney or, say, a trustee in bankruptcy, they're generally exempt. But the distinction lies in whether it's part of a regular compensated real estate business. What's a common misconception there, do you think, where that line is drawn?
I think people often assume, oh, it's my own property, I can do whatever. But the DRE sees it differently if it becomes like a regular business, almost. Compare that to, say, a resident manager, like Kelly in that example. Lives on site, shows units, collects rent, accepts pre-printed applications. She doesn't need a license, as long as her duties are strictly limited to those admin tasks. No negotiation at all. Okay, now, diving into the requirements themselves. A broker needs to be at least 18, plus 8 college-level courses and experience or a degree. For a salesperson or associate licensee, it's 45 hours of continuing aid every 4 years, and that's on top of the 135 hours of pre-licensing courses. These aren't just random numbers, They're designed to ensure a solid baseline of competence. And let's talk about money. This is a big one. Super critical rule, often on tests. A salesperson can only get paid by their responsible broker, period. Not directly from a client, not from a lender, nobody else. It's like a financial leash, right? Clear lines of accountability.
Precisely. And that rule isn't just bureaucratic red tape. It's a fundamental safeguard. It prevents conflicts of interest, ensures the supervising broker is ultimately accountable for the agent's actions. It protects everyone, really, consolidates oversight.
Absolutely. And still on protecting the public, advertising rules, huge. Your practice test highlighted a few common violations. Remember, blind ads, where a licensee doesn't disclose their license status. Totally illegal, like trying to sell something from behind a curtain. DRE demands transparency. Also, stuff like using photos of a renovated unit when the actual unit isn't like that, or even just, shaving a few $100 off the listed rent to get calls, that directly violates truth in advertising. FTCX stuff. Advertising has to be truthful, always, backed by evidence.
And if we connect that, regulations around advertising, even fictitious business names, your DBA, right, it has to be DRE approved. Like, Danny's Realty might be okay if Danny is the broker, But Daniela Realty isn't if Danielle is the actual broker name used elsewhere. And even font sizes for required contact info can't be smaller than the smallest font used anywhere else in the ad. It's all about preventing misrepresentation, ensuring transparency, knowing exactly who you're dealing with.
Right. And don't forget soliciting business. Remember, Sally, getting those unwanted voicemails in the scenario. Under the TCPA, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, if a customer says, take me off your list, you must do it immediately. Doesn't matter if you had a prior relationship. No grace period. It's instant. Okay, moving on. Agency. This is really the heart of how pros interact with clients and customers. And here, understanding the precise definitions, absolutely key. We hear agent and customer use loosely all the time, right? In everyday chat. But in real estate, distinct legal meanings. An agent represents a principal. That's your client. Owe them fiduciary duties. A customer. Third party. No agency relationship. But you still owe them fairness, honesty, basic stuff. And this idea of authority to bind the principal, super crucial. Came up for you. We have three main types of agency: special, general, and universal. Special agency, most limited. Typical broker-client thing for one deal. It does not give the agent power to bind the principal to contracts. But general and universal, that authority is granted. Think of a property manager acting for an owner. That's typically general agency. They can sign leases for the owner.
And what's fascinating here is how those bedrock fiduciary duties, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, reasonable skill and care, old DCAR, right? They aren't just suggestions. They're legal obligations, guiding every single action an agent takes. Which of those duties do you think is most often misunderstood, especially by newer agents?
Good question. I'd probably say loyalty. Sounds simple, right? But it's really complex with dual agency, which leads us to a critical nuance. Definitely on your test. Single agency, one agent, one party. Simple. Dual agency. Same brokerage represents both buyer and seller. Same transaction. Now, the agent still owes loyalty, but it's not undivided loyalty anymore because they have duties to both sides. And that absolutely requires informed written consent from both principals. It's a real tightrope walk. It needs total transparency. Okay, contracts and leases. The backbone, right? The legal framework for deals. Understanding their elements, how they're classified, how they end. Essential. Remember, for a contract to be valid, 5 essential elements. Mutual assent, that's offer and acceptance. Consideration, something of value exchanged. Legally competent parties. Reality of consent, no fraud, no duress. And the lawful objective. If any of these are missing from the get-go, you might have a void contract, lacks legal force from day one. If one party can choose to enforce it or void it, that's voidable. Now here's a concept that often trips people up: the counteroffer. An acceptance. Has to be absolute, unconditional, mirror image rule basically. The slightest change to an offer is not acceptance, it's a counteroffer. And crucially, it acts as a rejection of the original offer. Once you counter that original offer, gone, off the table completely. Common trap.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, things like a time is of the essence clause in offers, or rules around addendums, amendments, they all serve to clarify and solidify that crucial mutual assent. These legal tools prevent ambiguity. They protect both parties in what can be, really complex deals.
Right. You were tested on leasehold estates too. Distinguishing them is key. An estate for years. Specific start and end time doesn't automatically renew. Think fixed-term lease. Months, years, doesn't matter. Fixed. Estate from period to period. Auto-renews unless someone terminates, like your typical month-to-month. Estate at will. Super flexible. Occupancy with consent, but either side can end at any time, with proper notice, of course. And finally, estate at sufferance. Tenant overstays their welcome, without the landlord's consent. Basically a holdover tenant.
And what's really interesting there is the demising clause in a lease. It's the specific part of the contract that grants the lessee temporary possession. That's like the heartbeat of the lease, right?
Yeah.
Legally establishes that privity of estate and privity of contract, defines the whole landlord-tenant relationship.
Okay, let's touch on landlord entry. Landlords can enter with notice for things like repairs, showing the unit, but they don't need notice in an emergency. Or if the unit's clearly abandoned. It's about balancing tenant privacy with the landlord's responsibility to maintain the place. And then eviction. Got to know the types. Actual eviction. That's the legal process. Tenant physically removed by law enforcement. Constructive eviction. That's when the landlord's actions or inaction make the place uninhabitable. Forces the tenant out. And importantly, self-help eviction. Landlords trying to force tenants out themselves, making it miserable. Threats. Totally illegal in California.
Which brings up an important point, especially given that scenario you saw, the one with the tenant with a mental illness.
Yeah.
Well, you absolutely cannot discriminate based on disability. That's fair housing law. It is legal to evict a tenant who poses a direct threat to other tenants' health or safety. That distinction between disability and demonstrable threat, crucial.
Good point. And regarding trust accounts, Another biggie. A broker must put client funds into a separate, dedicated trust account within 3 business days of getting them. Commingling. Mixing personal funds with client funds. Illegal. Even worse, conversion. That's actually spending those client funds. Basically stealing. The DRE takes these incredibly seriously. Huge breach of trust. All right, let's shift gears. Finance. Often where numbers and terms get a bit overwhelming, but we'll break it down. Clear, digestible pieces, especially those math questions you saw. First up, common confusion point. Who is the mortgager? The mortgager is the borrower, the one getting the loan using the mortgage as security. The mortgagee, that's the lender, EE, lender payee. OR, borrower giver. Now, California, it's unique. Technically, it's a lien theory state. Borrower keeps title, lender gets a lien, but the preferred security instrument used here, almost always a deed of trust, which actually operates more like title theory. There's a neutral third party, the trustee. They hold the legal title for the lender, who's the beneficiary, until the borrower, the trustor, pays off the debt. So borrower is trustor, lender is beneficiary, trustee holds the title, like a referee.
Exactly. And what's really insightful there is how that choice, the deed of trust, impacts foreclosure in California. Because the trustee already holds the title, it usually allows for a faster, less complex, non-judicial foreclosure. Through a power of sale clause, lender can take possession without court approval if the borrower defaults. Big efficiency gain for lenders compared to mortgages, which often need a longer judicial foreclosure.
Right. And you were tested on some key clauses, too. The acceleration clause lets the lender demand the entire loan balance immediately if the borrower defaults, even on one payment. It's their big hammer. The alienation clause, also called due on sale, prevents a new buyer from just assuming the loan without lender approval, calls the loan due upon sale. And don't mix those up with the demising clause, which, as we said, grants possession in a lease. Different world. Okay, the mortgage market. Think of it in 2 tiers. The primary mortgage market. That's where loans are born, where you, the borrower, meet lenders. Banks, credit unions, mortgage bankers, they meet the consumer need for mortgage loans. Then, the secondary mortgage market. This is where those original loans get bought and sold. Why? So primary lenders can reload on capital, get cash back to make more loans. Keeps funds flowing. Big players here. GSEs. Government-sponsored enterprises. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. They buy loans, package them into mortgage-backed securities. Investments. Ginnie Mae is also key. Uniquely backed by the U.S. government. Makes their securities super safe.
Which raises an interesting question, doesn't it? Why is the FHA, Federal Housing Administration, the world's largest insurer of mortgages funded by MIP, mortgage insurance premiums, while the VA, Department of Veterans Affairs, guarantees loans for vets funded by a funding fee? Neither actually lends the money. The insight. They play different vital roles in supporting the private market, making homeownership accessible by reducing risk for the lenders.
Okay, let's tackle those numbers. Your test had some direct math. Remember, 1 discount point, or origination point, it equals 1% of the loan amount. Not the purchase price, loan amount. So, $155,000 mortgage, 3 discount points. That's $4,650. $150,000 times 0.03. Calculating annual interest. Pretty straightforward. Principal times interest rate. So $200,000 loan, 4.5% interest. That's $9,000 in annual interest, 200,000 times 0.045. And those ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages, what makes the payments change? It's the fluctuations in the cost of money. Based on a market index, like prime rate or whatever index is used. It's not the loan amount changing or a fixed rate suddenly becoming unfixed. That was a point of confusion for you, I think. And don't forget specialized loans, USDA direct loans, fantastic for low-income buyers in rural areas, often 0 down payment. Perfect for that scenario like Jake's on your test. Affordability, down payment issues. And the CalV loan program, unique to California, the state agency, CDVA, actually buys the property, then sells it to the veteran using a land contract. They keep the title until it's paid off. The very distinct path for vets. Okay, finally, let's round this out. Government powers over land use, property valuation, essential stuff. Remember the acronym PT, police power, eminent domain, taxation, escheat. The government's basic toolkit for land control. Police power, that's the government's right to regulate land use. Public protection includes zoning ordinances, dictate how land can be used, residential, commercial, industrial, etc. But what if your property just doesn't fit the zoning? It creates a real hardship. That's where variances come in. An exception to zoning. Granted, when complying would cause undue hardship because of the property's physical characteristics, like Kim's lot on your test, had that stream, made it impossible to meet setback rules. It's about fairness, practicalities.
Exactly, and that's critical. Zoning imposes order, sure. But the variance process acknowledges, not all lots are created equal. It's a safety valve. Allows reasonable deviations without totally undermining zoning's purpose.
Property taxes. They're ad valorem taxes. Based on assessed value. You saw that question on California's homeowners exemption, right? Reduces assessed value by $7,000. for qualifying owner-occupied homes. And can't forget Proposition 13. Landmark California law limits property taxes to 1% of full market value, plus some bonds assessments. Huge impact. There's also the documentary transfer tax, one-time state tax when property changes hands. And if taxes go unpaid, can lead to a tax sale. But the previous owner gets a 5-year right of redemption, chance to buy it back, significant grace period. For prorations, like in that Carlos and Bobby tax scenario you work through, use a 360-day banker's year, unless told otherwise. Got to calculate that precisely. We also touched on key environmental laws. CERCLA, the Superfund Act, creates a process. Identify who's responsible for hazardous waste cleanup and SARA. Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, amended CERCLA, more funds, stronger rules. The Clean Air Act, as you saw, focuses on air pollution. Pretty self-explanatory name there. Finally, appraisals. An appraisal is an official valuation done by a licensed appraiser. It's an impartial opinion of market value. Critical independent assessment for buyers, lenders, everyone. You were asked about general data in an appraisal. That refers to info about the property surrounding area, the city, region, neighborhood trends, distinct from specific property data like square footage or number of bedrooms.
And connecting that, a key concept in appraisal is highest and best use. What's the property's most profitable use? That's also legal, physically possible, and produces the greatest yield. Crucial for determining value. You have to consider zoning, lot size, market demand, all of it. Maybe that small residential lot has higher value if it could be rezoned commercial, for example.
So, okay, what does this all mean for you? We've covered a lot today, a real deep dive. From those DRE regulation details, contract nuances, all the way to finance and government controls. You've walked through agency, loan types, even specific math, reinforcing those spots you flagged from Practice Test 3.
Yeah, which raises an important question, right? How can you leverage this focused review to build even more confidence?
Yeah.
Understanding how these concepts connect, especially those precise definitions and how they apply practically. It doesn't just prep you for exams. It equips you with the real foundational knowledge to navigate California real estate complexities. Keep connecting those dots. Each piece strengthens the whole picture.
Exactly. And remember, active learning is the real secret here. You actively found areas needing work. That curiosity, that's your biggest asset. Keep asking why. Keep asking how. You won't just be informed, you'll be truly well-versed. So thinking about everything we unpacked today, all the rules, the protections, the complexities, what do you think is the single most effective way a real estate professional can build and maintain public trust in this industry? Something to chew on.